public opinion, it may still be the case that there's a moral imperative to that violence, to expressing that rage, to engaging in property damage. It's often the case that people reach a point where they believe, they conclude rationally, that their voices simply will not be heard, will be ignored, will be marginalized, unless they force people to see things burning, unless they exhibit the level of rage that they're experiencing, to put fear in the hearts of elites and the ruling class who without it will simply continue to ignore them. The same dynamic certainly led a lot of people either to switch voting for Barack Obama twice and vote for Donald Trump in 2016, not because of who he was and what he believed, but despite it, or who chose not to vote at all, expressing anger and rage toward a political order that has ignored them and marginalized them and that refuses to pay them any heed. And it's probably a very significant factor in the election in 2018 in the country that I'm in, Brazil, of President Jair Bolsonaro. We personally know many people who found his ideology repellent and yet voted for him as an agent of destruction. And so it may be the case that property value being destroyed and civil disobedience and confronting the police is not a very strategically wise choice from the perspective of how do you foster the most amount of legislative reform in the narrow area of police brutality, or even having short-term benefits in public opinion. But it nonetheless may be the case that it's morally justified to do it anyway on the grounds that the society simply won't listen unless it feels in some way threatened by the disorder that will be created if the status quo continues.
Violence employed by police and security agencies such as the FBI, which have devolved into occupying forces to protect the exclusive interests of a tiny ruling criminal class, exposes the fiction of the rule of law and the treason of the ruling class. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience, Stokely Carmichael warned. And if your opponent is bereft of a conscience, then state violence is inevitably met with counter-violence. Tyranny takes the place of reform. The danger of widespread sectarian violence in America is now very real. How long can you expect people to watch their children go hungry? How long can you expect people to watch their loved ones suffer and die because they can't get medical care? How long can you expect people to be abused by lawless police and a court system designed to railroad the poor into jails and prisons? How long can you watch the rich profit from your misery? I would prefer that our revolution eschew the poison of violence, which I know too intimately from my 2 decades as a war correspondent, but I also know that when everything around you conspires to crush you, the only way left to affirm yourself is to destroy. Not only the structures and institutions that have oppressed you, but often yourself. Let's talk about that. So you say the ruling elite has lost all legitimacy and their monopoly on violence. So go ahead and explain that a little bit more.
Well, because that defines government in its modern term, and that is that it has the monopoly on violence. It alone has the right to use violence. But it can only essentially claim that right if the government represents the consent and the will of the governed. Once it no longer does, then its legitimacy to monopolize violence is mute.
David Sirota mentions 10 things Democrats could do right now if they actually wanted to stop Trump's power grab. Number 1, they should stop trying to give Trump more police power. Number 2, they should not pass a Pentagon spending bill that would fund Trump's military invasion of American cities. Number 3, they should call Trump's bluff, use his own plan to defund the police and launch investigations. Number 4, they should stop giving military-grade weapons to local police departments, as Barack Obama continued to do. Number 5, they should fire the bad police chiefs and de-escalate. Number 6, they should prosecute the bad cops. Number 7, they should restrict the National Guard. Number 8, they should pass legislation restricting the police and ending immunity. Number 9, they should repeal and block anti-protester laws and pass state protections. And number 10, they should stop taking money from police associations. The fact that the Democrats don't do this when they absolutely could shows that they're complicit with the Republicans. I'll end with this article, Law and Order, Property Rights, and How These Ideas Impact Left-Wing Ideology. Law and order is the hand inside the glove when it comes to the protection of property. Those who have stuff want law and order to exist so their stuff will be protected. Law enforcement and military personnel exist to protect economic interests at every level. So whose economic interests do they most protect? The economic interests of people who have the most stuff are the most protected. The stuff of the haves gets protected, not the stuff of the have-nots, because the have-nots don't have any stuff. Elitism is not a leftist concept. The elites, right or pseudo-left, are currently united in their desire to protect everyone's right to possess property. And whether or not they are willing to admit it, they want these rights to supersede everyone's other inalienable rights. Proof? It has become increasingly evident over the last couple of weeks that damaging anyone's property gets the elite's attention much more quickly than voting ever will. A bedrock principle, especially for traditional conservatives, is that they should legally be able to protect and defend their own property. Most also want to live in an equitable society, but that idea gets paired with the seemingly conflicting idea that if people work hard and are clever, they ought to be able to have more wealth and status than other people, despite what Jesus and the other prophets have said about wealth and status. Although I'd be fine, as would George Carlin, may he rest in peace, with new rules where nobody owned anything or anybody, if we are going to allow property rights to continue, and admittedly the right to own property is a bedrock principle of our Constitution, then we also must ensure not only that A, our economic and social systems are equitable regardless of gender, race, creed, and so forth, but also that B, people, especially children, are not allowed to suffer and die simply because they have not conformed to the merit-based global system that has become especially cutthroat since the Reagan/Thatcher era. Our current system allows an unprecedented level of bullying by the elites of those who are on the lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder. As examples, the prison industrial complex and the military intelligence complex. This bullying happens to innocent people both in the US and abroad. In short, our global neoliberal US system, run for the benefit of transnational corporations by two complicit parties for well over 40 years, is exploitative on at least the same scale as any oppressive regime that ever has existed in world history. Whether that regime is labeled communist, socialist, capitalist, fascist, or anything else, this country is the biggest bully in history. Is looting ethical? How might the ideas of property rights clash with left-wing ideology? Whether or not we get there through lawful means, people on the left should feel an ethical compunction that leads them to want to ensure that everyone has enough, including universally available single-payer federal health care, decent wages, a federal jobs guarantee, guaranteed access to excellent K-12 public education, which includes the arts, guaranteed access to public higher education, and a system that doesn't grossly discriminate against people, both socially and economically, who have not attained a college degree and/or an impressive resume. If you are not willing to accept the items on this list, I'd be bold enough to assert that you have little business calling yourself any kind of leftist. That's because, as stated earlier, elitism is not a leftist concept. Apparently, we'll never be allowed to vote our way into a system inspired by leftist values, even if the majority of Americans seems to favor such values. So what recourse is left for the left? Civil rights legislation only happened after days of widespread rioting with massive property damage. After MLK was assassinated, 110 American cities started rioting, causing $47 million in damage. That's in 1968 dollars. On the sixth day of the riots, the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was passed. If, as asserted earlier, this country is the biggest bully in world history, then such an exploitative regime should be resisted, whether that requires tea to be dumped or bayonets, pitchforks, and guillotines to be employed. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. If we look at our current situation through the lens of what was happening in the 1700s, it's obviously again timely to declare our causes with boldness. The one people is still we the people. Whether or not the framers originally intended all of us to be included from the get-go, we now, in solidarity with all the oppressed, must clearly state our intentions. One people is all people. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. From my current perspective, the current destruction of property in response to the current tyranny is at least as appropriate as it was on December 16, 1773. We have reached and exceeded the limits of what is acceptable. Tyranny must therefore be resisted and demolished. We must make it clear to the current government that if, at the least, the following conditions are not forthcoming, including universally available single-payer federal health care, decent wages, a federal jobs guarantee, guaranteed access to excellent K-12 public education, including the arts, guaranteed access to public higher education, and a system that doesn't grossly discriminate against people, socially and economically, who have not attained a college degree and or an impressive resume, then it is our right and duty to abolish said government and institute a new one. Under the current circumstances, property damage may be the least of the government's concerns. You've already heard a little bit from Chris Hedges. He speaks eloquently to this point. The loss of control over our system of rulership, the misuse of all democratic institutions, the electoral process and laws to funnel money upwards into a handful of oligarchs while stripping us of power ominously means that the ruling elites can no longer claim the right to have a monopoly on violence. Violence employed by police and security agencies such as the FBI, which have devolved into occupying forces to protect the exclusive interests of a tiny ruling criminal class, exposes the fiction of the rule of law and the treason of the ruling elites. It's interesting that he mentions Joe Biden specifically by name. If we had a functioning judicial and legislative system, Biden, along with the other architects of our disastrous imperial wars, plundering of the country, and betrayal of the American working class, would be put on trial, not offered up as a solution to our political and economic debacle. The myopia of the ruling elites is that they think they can foist Biden on us because he is not Trump. But the game is up. The facade of democracy no longer works. It is only the dwindling and largely white middle and professional classes who still believe the fiction that this election offers a choice or that we live in a democracy. The working class and the working poor know better.